Welcome to our webinar. We're talking VanBo cybersecurity and SecurityStudio's S2 org. So VanBo is a partner of SecurityStudio. We work together. We'll go through kind of what that relationship looks like and what we do together. At the end of the day, we're trying to help organizations really of all sizes, focusing primarily on our underserved markets, small to medium-sized business, state and local government, education, and consumers. In helping them solve information security challenges. Many of these challenges really, complexity is the enemy of information security. So we're going to talk about how that plays out, why simplicity is very, very important. And we'll go through a discussion of about what information security is and what you should do about it. My name is Evan Francen. I'm SecurityStudio's founder, co-founder, and CEO. So thanks for joining us. We'll get through the presentation. I really appreciate questions. So if you have questions and you know how to use the chat, there's a chat button that you can open up a chat panel and type any questions you have. You can also do that in the Q&A and we'll address those as we go. But we want to get as much value as possible out of the time with us. And again, welcome. So let's get started. So here are our topics for today. Introductions. We'll introduce VanBo. Some of you who don't know who VanBo is or what VanBo does, we'll go through what VanBo is and who they are. We'll talk about SecurityStudio. We'll talk about our partnership together, how important it is for us to work together. We have a very significant interest in seeing VanBo really succeed in their information security practice. This industry is really all over the place. If you've been in this industry for a while, you know some of the brokenness in our industry. One of those things is we don't all speak the same language. So working together with VanBo allows us to really reach more people with simplification of information security without cutting any corners, right? It's really easy to just go off and chase blinky lights, look for easy buttons in information security. Unfortunately, they don't exist. So that leads us into talking about what information security is. It's funny, it's a question that you can ask veterans, 20, 30-year veterans in this industry and some of the new people in this industry. Just give me your definition of information security. And if you think about that for a little, it's a more difficult answer than most people are willing to admit. But we're going to tackle that. We're going to go into that because that's really important. If you're going to work with somebody on information security, it's a really good idea to have a definition of information security. We'll introduce you to S2 org. It's an information security risk assessment that's a few thousand organizations. I think we're up to maybe 4,500 organizations have done across the United States and actually international now. It's a simplified, objective information security risk assessment. And we'll fit that into what our definition of information security is and why that's so important to use a quantifiable risk assessment. Simple, inexpensive. We'll talk about all that stuff. The introduction to the S2 score, just a simple management principle, is I can't manage the things I can't measure. So S2 score is an information security measurement based on risk. Now, there is no perfect information security or no perfect measurement in general. We talk about something like distance, for instance, an inch or a centimeter. They're both valid measurements of distance. Arguing one being better over the other is where subjectivity comes in. So we'll talk about S2 score, why it's a very valid, good information security risk measurement, how you can apply it to your business, really to give yourself kind of a leg up on all this. Validated assessments, they're assessments you do yourself, which is what we call a self-assessment, completely viable and important for your own risk management purposes. But then the validated assessment, having a third party come in and attest to the accuracy of your assessment is very, very important. How to get started. So if you're going to spend time here learning about information security, learning about some of these concepts, how does it apply? What can you do with this information? That's what we'll cover and how to get started, and then we'll go through some questions and answers. I like questions. Most of the time I have answers. If I don't, we'll find one. It's, again, most important for us together is to get value. You won't get any more time. The time you spend with us, you won't get back. So let's make the most of it. Here's VanBo. VanBo is an information security management organization in Wisconsin. Great company. We know the founders very, very well. We believe in how they practice information security, which at the end of the day, we have a saying here that if you ever sell a customer something that they don't need, I'll run you over with my truck. And it's a joke, I guess. But our mission is to fix this broken information security industry. VanBo is very much like-minded in that. They don't do things that don't benefit the organization. How can you use information security investments and dollars to make your business better? Ideally, to make your business more money. Is there a return on investment in security? Typically there's not, but we can use it that way. And I think VanBo does just a great job. Very happy to have them as partners. This is a little bit, well, SecurityStudio, our experience. We've been doing security for a very long time. 2,400 years. It's a lot of years, but really just add a bunch of security people. And not all security people look like this. So this beard that you see, this is, I think it happens just from being locked up for too long. COVID certainly didn't help with that, but this is what you end up looking like if you do security long enough. So VanBo certainly contributes to our mission of fixing the broken industry. This is us. So this mission of fixing the broken industry, it can be summed up as information security is not about information or security as much as it is about people. And that's really important from two different perspectives. One, people suffer when things go wrong. We take that personally. Empathy, certainly plays into that. When things go wrong, people suffer. If they didn't suffer, then nobody would care. But they do, and people do care. So that's one perspective. The other perspective is people are the most significant risk. We can continue to, dump technology onto information security problems, and we can address some risks, but ultimately the source of many risks, people, requires people, right? So we have to simplify information security to be understandable by, a wider group of people. We address this, our issues through taking really complex security things, breaking them down into fundamentals. Most information security risk is actually found in the fundamentals of information security, missing fundamentals. So our solutions really focus on mastering those fundamentals and using those fundamentals to determine where to go next. So, going off and chasing, some of the pipe dreams in our industry is fine when the time is right. So focusing on those fundamentals becomes really, really important. We're a social company, so you can find us on LinkedIn, you can find us on Twitter. That's us. So to accomplish our mission of fixing this broken industry to simplify information security, we created a platform. The platform was grown out of 15 years of information security experience trying to quantify and measure information security programs for many of our clients. At another company, it was called FRSecure, still around, still does great. FRSecure also has this same mission of fixing the broken industry. Well, if that's our mission, then a company by itself won't be able to do that. So we needed to expand. We needed to put our tools onto a platform, make them available to partners, to competitors, really anybody, customers. So we built the platform. It's called SecurityStudio. It's the same name as the company, as the platform. We shorten it by calling it S2. And in that S2 platform, we put tools. The first tool is the most fundamental risk management tool, which is a risk assessment tool. That's the S2 org. Integrated with the S2 org is the S2 vendor, which is a third-party information security risk management tool. Depending on what you read and where you read, 65% of all breaches come from, directly or indirectly, our vendors, our third-party relationships. So it's very important enough that you need to create a separate tool to manage it, an integrated but separate tool. And then the S2 team is, really a people information security risk management tool, and the S2 me is a personal risk information security risk management tool. Take them all together, use the same quantification. You can integrate things so a CEO or a CIO or a CISO at an organization can really drill down and figure out where their most significant risks are, and then make those investments as wisely as possible. So VanBo is a partner who uses the same risk management tools as 30 or actually 40 other partners in the United States to do assessments using the same language. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Best in class, meaning we built it off of the original version of S2 org was built off of BS 7799. If you're a security person, you'll know what that is. It's just an old standard that's been replaced by the ISO standard, 27002, which then has been updated numerous times. I think the latest version is 2013. And then that has been incorporated into what's called the NIST CSF. So if I haven't confused anybody yet, the CSF is the cybersecurity framework. That's where S2 org lives today, right? It's built from the NIST CSF, which is really, really important in our industry because we need to have the credibility behind the assessment for people who don't understand it yet. So that's all good stuff. So today's topic really is the S2 org. That's what we're going to drill into. There's VanBo's website and their LinkedIn. Again, there's not enough good things I can say about good people. And VanBo is certainly run by some good people who want to make a positive difference for their customers. So it's really cool to be able to work with them. So here's a question. For those who are already in information security and have been in this industry, I've asked the same question. There's two questions I've typically asked over the years. I don't do consulting anymore. I've moved out of that. But there are two. I talk to CISOs a lot still. What's your definition of information security and who's ultimately responsible? That's two simple questions. I think most of us should be able to answer, but we struggle with it. So we're going to go through that definition of information. As you're sitting there thinking about this, think about what your own definition is. And then I'll go through mine. Well, if you want to, we can talk about it. We can certainly do some Q&A. But if you like our definition of information security, I encourage you to use it. If you don't like it, I encourage you to tell us so that we can try to figure out how we can play this game together. The way information security works today, we continue to move very fast in terms of technology. Information security, privacy, and safety, three really important issues, can no longer be separated. So, and I'm connected to you one way or another. So it's really important for us to use the same definition. So I'll go through that and hopefully you'll like it. Here's the definition: managing risk to unauthorized information disclosure, alteration, and destruction using administrative, physical, and technical controls. That seems like an academic definition, but as we walk through it, there are some key things to this definition in terms of managing risk. What is managing risk? Unauthorized disclosure, alteration, and destruction. Oftentimes we're focused on the disclosure part, and oftentimes at the expense of alteration and destruction. And some examples in the real world, ransomware would be an unauthorized destruction of data. It's a temporary destruction. If you pay the ransom, you may get the data back, but that's one, I guess, example of destruction. Disclosure, you see all the time, that's where privacy lives. Alteration, making sure that data is accurate. Fortunately or unfortunately, the banks that I do business with, they want to make sure that the data is accurate. If I were able to add a couple of zeros to my bank account, awesome for me, not so good for the bank and the rest of the customers. So all these have to play really well together. And we'll go through this definition. The first time you've kind of seen it, it may seem a little awkward, but hopefully it'll all make sense. So let's break it down. managing risk is very important. It's not eliminating risk. There's nothing you can do to eliminate information security risk. You need to live with it. Ideally, the more you understand information security risk and how it works in the world, the more you actually become comfortable with it. And that's a stretch for some people. I think it's because there's this misunderstanding of what it actually is. But if I focus on managing risk and not eliminating it, then other things start to come into the equation. Things like detection. I know I can't prevent bad things from happening. I better be able to detect the bad things when they happen. So detection becomes kind of more important if I'm managing risk as opposed to eliminating it. Same with response. Right? Being able to, if what I can't prevent, I better be able to detect. Once I detect it, I better have a response. That's a cycle. So really important that it's managing risk, not eliminating risk. Another word that you won't see here is compliance. Information security isn't compliance. Compliance is basically doing what you've been told to do. When we run an information security program based on compliance, we typically take shortcuts. We typically check boxes. We get a false sense of security. It's not that compliance is necessarily bad. It's people's tendency to do the letter of the law versus the intent of the law. So the intent of the law might be that you manage risk. The letter of the law, it's very hard to describe all that without being too prescriptive. So managing risk, not compliance, really important stuff. So managing risk, hopefully that makes sense. The second part of our definition of information security is disclosure, alteration, and destruction of data. Equally as important, depending on the application and depending on the context. The opposite of this, if you're an information security person, you probably run into CIA for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. That's the goal, is to maintain confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The opposite of that is disclosure, alteration, and destruction. The reason why we use disclosure, alteration, and destruction in our definition of information security is because risk is always based on bad events. So a disclosure, an alteration, a destruction, those are all bad events. Risk is always associated with bad outcomes. So that's that. Keeping something secret, we focus a lot here. So when you think about where privacy lives in terms of information security, privacy is a sub piece of information security. So if I'm running my security program based on privacy, I'm only getting one part of the equation. I'm only focusing on a small part, really. Privacy is very important. It's highly regulated. But privacy, when you think about it in our definition, is really only protecting against unauthorized information disclosure of a specific type of data, specific type of information, not information in general. There's lots of information. There was a story that came out yesterday. The FBI director, Ray, pointed out how prevalent China's attacking of U.S. Assets is and how many cases they're opening daily. Most of those attacks are focused on now. They've already got, a lot of the personal identifiable information, but a lot of the attacks now are focused on IP, intellectual property. That has nothing to do with privacy. So hopefully that's all making sense to you. Risks in each, have to be considered. So what is the risk of unauthorized disclosure? What is the risk of alteration, unauthorized alteration of data or destruction of data? Finding the right balance comes down to making risk decisions. What risks am I comfortable with? What risks do I even know about? So everything's going to tie back to the risk. And again, you can't eliminate it. This is where we see most of the shortcuts being taken in information security, and this is why it's very important for us to have this in our definition. Administrative, physical, and technical controls. Administrative controls are things like policies, procedures, training and awareness. It's the people part of information security. It's often the place where you find the most risk, and it's also the most challenging part of information security to address. There's all kinds of old school ways that we've tried to address administrative controls, such as creating policies and asking everybody to read policies, some training and awareness things that we're doing nowadays or used to do were dry. Nobody likes mandatory training. So administrative controls has always been kind of challenging for most of us. Physical controls, we have a saying in our industry, it doesn't really matter how good your firewall works if I can steal your server. So physical controls have to be accounted for in information security to some degree. The degree is really more of a math problem than anything else. And then the technical controls, which is really where we've traditionally focused on information security for whatever reason. In most organizations, information security reports through an IT function, whether it be a CIO, CTO, something like that. It's unfortunate because we need to undo a lot of it. It truly is a business issue that requires business consideration. There are certain things that happen within information security that really affect the business, even the business's viability, especially in the small to mid-sized businesses. And if people are the most significant risk, we're not going to fix it. We might mitigate some risk with some of our technical controls, but you won't fix and you won't get to the root of the risk problems. So again, the most significant part of all of this in terms of where we focus most of our attention is new strategies, new ways, even some of the old fundamental ways of addressing administrative controls, the people part of information security. So administrative controls, just to recap, that's the people part of information security. Management has to assume responsibility. If you go back to those two questions that I ask all the time, what is information security? Because if we're going to work on information security together, we should have a common definition. And number two, who's ultimately responsible for information security? Roles and responsibilities. In an organization, it's the top, right? It's the CEO, it's the board of directors if one exists. It's not the CISO. The true function of a CISO meaning a Chief Information Security Officer, the true function, bringing it really simple, one is to consult the business on information security risks so that the business can make good risk decisions. That's job number one. Job number two is to implement those risk decisions to their best ability. So management has to play a role here. Management needs to make those risk decisions for us. They can delegate some of that, but what you don't want is to have the information security person or people making risk decisions on behalf of the business, unless the business is in business to just secure information. Oftentimes, though, businesses are in business to make money. So if the business is in business to make money, management needs to make decisions. One of the things we say often, and the way attackers work, when I started in information security in the early 90s, we did a lot of things that really weren't considered, I think at the time, to be legal. They were more Frankish, bragging rights, things like that. The industry has evolved so much since then. Truly, the attackers are running their organizations like it is a business. And if they're running it like a business, they're going for their best return on their investment. And today, still, the best return on their investment is people. It's much easier, it's much more effective to make a phone call, to send out emails, phishing emails, to get a much better return, passwords, authentication information, versus trying to peg a firewall, which may or may not have a vulnerability for hours or days or even months and weeks and months. So it's easier to go through the secretary than it is to go through your firewall, and attackers know that, you and I know that. That's where they're going. Physical controls we can't discount. The saying here is it's easier to go through it doesn't matter how well your firewall works, I can just go through your front door if I can just steal your server. This used to be sort of a funny joke. People would laugh about this a little bit. We've seen it happen numerous times, and when it does happen, there was one person who was in the talk many years ago that heard me say this and laughed about it, and then called our office maybe a year or two after, said, "Hey, I remembered what you said about physical security. Somebody who stole our server." It was a law firm, and one of the partners, when they left the firm, took the server. Physical protection and physical controls are things that are pretty easy for people to relate to. They're more difficult for people to quantify risk in. Physical controls would be things like door locks, camera surveillance, guards, building design. Those all play a role in physical security. Even crime rate plays a role in physical security, crime rate of the area that you operate in. Lots of things there. So why is this all important? Some of us didn't know. That's totally fine. You know, I don't expect, the way our industry works, there's about 900,000 information security people in the United States, meaning people that do this for a job that should know this. And then there's 330 million non-security people. I call them normal people, but some people take offense to that nowadays. So I guess we'll call them average people in the world. So to expect everybody to know this is it's wrong. Some people don't know, and so we spend a lot of our time educating. It's funny, we spend a lot of our time educating people on the same basics and fundamentals today we were doing 20 years ago. And so we'll continue, you know, to drive home and continue to, you know, to fight this battle until we're making more of an effect. And then there's different ways to communicate. We're always trying to figure out those different angles. Another reason why this is important for you, if you didn't know, you're probably not doing this right. Based on our own observations of literally thousands of companies that we work with, either directly or indirectly. Most companies are still treating information security like it's an IT issue. It still fits under the IT budget. They typically fail at the managing risks because in order for me to manage a risk, I need to first assess a risk, then make risk decisions, implement those risk decisions, and then continue to reassess. That's the management function for risk. And many organizations still aren't doing that for whatever reason. I would say 80-ish% of organizations in the United States, organizations profit and nonprofit, based on our own sort of observations, 80% aren't doing fundamental risk assessments. It's your responsibility. We all have a role in information security. It's not everybody, when you talk about information security from a global perspective, it's not everybody's responsibility. But everybody has responsibilities in information security. You know, sharing your passwords, using weak passwords, all those things. Those have implications. When you see something that seems a little bit off, you know, reporting that's a responsibility. Your own responsibility at home. Nobody cares about your information security, your personal information more than you should. So these practices that you need to, at some point, learn and adopt as habits, those are parts of your responsibilities. My children at home are my responsibility. I mentioned, you know, in this presentation already, that information security, privacy, and safety can no longer be separated. There was a study done by Bark. I don't know if you've seen the video. This is one of the things that just kind of frustrates me. Bark did a video they did a test of how long it would take for an 11-year-old girl to be propositioned online. And so they did a lot of work. They created a really good profile. This is a prepubescent child. 22 seconds it took before they had their first connection. So as parents, and they're doing it through electronics. They're doing it through the same mechanisms that we would use to protect information security. So these things, everybody has responsibilities. If you don't know what your responsibilities are, ask. Let's work together to try to figure out. Maybe we don't all know. Somebody's got to take responsibility for it and be held accountable, you know, for doing things they should be doing. So what do? Well, first, define your rules for the game. I like to think of information. I grew up a kind of a gamer. I don't know if there's any gamers online. I like to think of things as games because I like to win. And And two, games are more enjoyable than just dry whatever. So defining rules for the game, if you think of information security as a game, how would I define the rules? Where would my rules go? So your rules go into policy. That is the rules. Think of like when you go to Target or wherever you get your board games, and you invite your friends over to come play games that night, or your family. You go buy a new board game at Target, you bring it home. How many will read the instructions for the game? Typically just one, right? So to ask, security works a lot the same way, to ask everybody in your company to read the policies. If those are the rules for our game, but in effect, policies aren't meant to be read. Policies are meant to be referenced, just like rules for a board game. So there's a lot of analogy here that really fits. When you define the rules for your game, rule number one is don't cut corners. Don't treat information security like it's an IT issue when you know your most significant risk is people. Your most significant risk probably resides in administrative controls. So it's very, very important for us not to cut corners when we're defining rules for our game. Limit opinions. Use objective data as much as possible. Some of you watching, well, I'm guessing all of us have been watching, kind of current events with COVID. One of the difficult challenges for a data guy like me is trying to understand what's data and what's opinion. And then not just what's data, but where did the data come from? What does it actually represent? Those are all really important in defining things and making good, solid decisions. So as you're defining rules for the game, try to limit as much as possible bias, try to limit as much as possible your opinions, try to use factual data. This will require some research or require working with somebody who's done research for you. Implement measurement. I can't manage what I can't measure. Don't try. If you're going to create your own measurement, you can certainly do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Or if you're going to use a measurement that's already been created, such as the S2 score, it becomes really important. How else will I know if I'm making a positive impact or I'm making things worse? How else will I know where to spend my next information security dollar? I can't compare one control to another. Lots of reasons why you need to implement measurement. Three things become really, really important if you're going to create your own measurement. One, it needs to be objective for it to be valid, meaning it's either this or it's not this. Binary, on or off, 0 or 1, black or white, right? Binary things. So it needs to be objective. Number two, it needs to be consistent. So if you're going to create your own measurement, ensure that you apply it consistently. So if you take distance, for instance, an inch is an inch no matter what. It's just an inch. I apply it here, it's an inch. I apply it over there, it's an inch. Same sort of thing with information security or any valid measurement. And the third, it needs to be relevant. So as you're creating your own measurement, if that's what you want to do, those three things would need to be, they're musts, right? Objectivity needs to be consistent and needs to be relevant. And that's what we've done with the S2 score. So you can certainly take a look at it and pull it apart. Make it simple, 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 simple. 2 steps is always easier to secure than 20. The way the applications are written today and the way kind of the world works, things are so complex, so much more complex than they need to be. Software development, for instance, there are things called KLOCs. It's 1,000 lines of code is what KLOC stands for. On average, in a good development shop, you might have, even upwards of 10 errors per 1,000 lines of code. Maybe say 5. So 5 errors per 1,000 lines of code. Then you take something like your operating system, Windows 10, 5, 6, 7, 10 million lines of code, depending on what you're running. So just think about how many errors are in that. Just one example of where complexity really gets us in a lot of trouble. Also, technology creep. You keep adding more and more technology into your environment. That's more and more technology you need to secure. So wherever you can, try to look for simplification in your information security program. It makes your life better, makes security certainly better. So we start here. if you're going to do these things, define the rules for your information security program. You can define that in policy. That's typically where you would define how we're going to do security things. If you don't know what to put in policy, start with just a charter, just an information security policy charter document, which is, this is who's responsible for what, and this is how we're going to do it. And then go into, managing risk. If information security is managing risk, that's where you go. So now it's time to play the game. So risk is, in order for you to manage risk, you have to assess it first. You start with an information security risk assessment. It's interesting how many people don't understand, don't know. And again, it's not a question of intelligence or anything like that. It's just a question of being educated, right? If I haven't read a book, then I wouldn't know what's in the book. Risk is one of those words that's just overused in really many aspects of life, certainly in information security. Risk is nothing more than the likelihood of something bad happening and the impact if it did. Those two things are functions that are derived from threats and vulnerabilities. So where are my vulnerabilities? The gaps in controls, and then apply your threats. And essentially that's where you do your risk assessment. So to manage risk, you first have to assess it. Once you've assessed it, you don't put it on a shelf. Lots of risk assessments have been unusable in the past. You use the risk assessment to make risk decisions. What am I going to do about this? If you've never done this before, the first few times you do it, it seems pretty mechanical and uncomfortable. And it's because you haven't done it before. As you get through the process and you start doing it and it becomes part of your business, that's when you can really start to realize a return on investment. That's when you can really start to realize efficiencies in business process. So you can get there. It just takes a few cycles before you do. But once you've assessed, and really, when you think about it, the way the world is going, you won't have a choice eventually. It's either do this or just continue to kind of fly blind with information security risk as risks continue to rise, and too many organizations are just ignorant of what those risks are. So eventually you'll need to get here anyway, the sooner the better. So you have four choices, only four choices when you have a risk. And so doing the risk assessment should point out risks. It should be quantified. So you should be able to compare one risk to another risk to determine which one is kind of more important to me. And then once you've done, looked at those risks, you have one of four choices. I accept the risk as is, meaning I'm comfortable with it. Okay, it's fine. I'm not going to, maybe I don't have the money and I am forced to live with it. Whatever the reason, you accepted the risk. The other is to transfer the risk. This is where you get cyber insurance. You're going to give the risk to somebody else to handle. Mitigating risks, so those are things that are going to require some action. You're going to have to change some things, put some controls in place to bring that risk more into alignment with what is acceptable to you in business. And then the last one is to avoid it altogether. You're just going to stop doing whatever it is you were doing that led to the risk. Those are your four choices. One of the not valid choices, which is common, is risk ignorance, just ignoring the risk, pretending like it doesn't exist. That ends up being the same as risk acceptance, and actually a little worse than risk acceptance. Certainly if there's a breach involved, certainly if there's litigation around it where people are going to be looking for liability. All right, so once you made those risk decisions, and you think about it, it's very simple. You do your risk assessment, you have your list of risks, you start making your risk decisions. And then in order to enact those risk decisions, you need to decide, okay, who's going to do that? And so when we talk risk acceptance, avoidance, mitigation, those things, primarily the mitigation stuff, who's going to implement these controls and when are they going to do it? Usually you plot that on a quarter by quarter basis. What that then becomes is a roadmap. So now everybody's got the same sort of, I guess, roadmap, 2 to 3 year roadmap on what it is we're going to do to manage our information security program, starting with a risk assessment. And you get to this place, the goal is to get to a place where you can converse with management to say, this is where we're at, This is where we're going. This is when we're going to get there, and this is how much it's going to cost. If you can start getting in, if you can get there with information security, it's now integrated with the business. The business now understands information security, and you treat it just like every other function in a business, whether it be finance, HR, or whatever. So it starts with a risk assessment, make those risk decisions, build your risk roadmap or your information security roadmap, and start execution. And everybody, and that's how you also create that accountability and those responsibilities, because certain people have certain things in that roadmap that need to be done. So it works out really, really well. So risk, well, manage risk, assess risk, make your decisions, and then repeat the cycle. That's the last part. It's never a destination. It needs to be integrated with the first, like I said, the first, we've done this so many times. The first couple of cycles, meaning 2 to 3 cycles, it's awkward. It doesn't feel natural. But as you get through it, it then starts to become natural. Then you start having management, executive management asking, hey, what's our current S2 score? What's our current risk score? Or we haven't done a risk assessment for a while, have we? Where's that at? Or they already know that. So all those things become sort of part of the business, and that's the place to be. It's certainly the place to be. So our information security risk assessment, this is what S2 org is. I'll just go through some screenshots. You can certainly get a demo account. VanBo can certainly help you. They're well-versed in how the S2 org works. They also have direct access to us, and they want us. So the S2 org, simple. The user interface needs to be simple. Everything, as much as possible, needs to be simple. So if you look at this first screen, you've got assessment, dashboard, and roadmap. Going down, you see phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. S2 org is made up of 4 phases. The first phase is administrative controls. That's the people part of information security. It's really as simple as conducting interviews, doing some operations, lots of ways to get that information to complete that part of the assessment, but it's all binary. There's no, I wonder what they're really asking here. Is there, I can interpret it this way or that way. It's very straightforward, which is, and that's, simple and easy. I think sometimes get confusing too. We confuse those two words. Simple doesn't mean easy, right? And simple also doesn't mean we can't have a lot of simple, right? So when you look at the assessment with S2 org, it's a very comprehensive assessment. It means it's a lot of simple, essentially. So phase 1, administrative controls. 2, there's our physical controls. So we're fitting with our definition of information security. Phase 3 and phase 4 are both technical in nature. And the reason why we break out internal and external technical controls is because the risks are so much different from each other in terms of vulnerabilities and in terms of threats. So those two are broken out, but overall, the 4 phases of information security are all incorporated in our S2 org. And you can see everything is scored. You see the scores, maturity, percentage complete, measure everything. My God, if you can, and once you get into that, if you become a measurement nut, that'd help you. But I measure everything. And that's kind of what a lot of us do here at SecurityStudio. We create new measurements for everything. Lots of things on the top. You got reset, request validation. We'll talk briefly about that. And then snapshotting your assessments. So once you're ready to archive assessments, you snapshot them. Dashboards, maps, all built into the tool to make it very simple for people to use. There's that S2 score. That's our quantification. We'll talk about where the S2 score came from. So the S2 score, it actually came from my own practice back in the early 2000s, maybe 15 years ago. I was tasked with, I was a CISO at a large pharmaceutical company, about a $4 billion pharmaceutical company. And I was continually drilled on, what are we getting for our information security investments? What does it mean? And I would get asked things like, say, hey, Evan, are we secure? I didn't even know how to answer a lot of those questions. So went down this path of creating this S2 score. It was very complicated at the beginning, and the very first versions of the S2 score were only technical in nature, but it's evolved many, many times since then. More than 5,000 assessments have been done or completed when you account for our partners and the ones that have been done by organizations. Objective, consistent. Those are two. Remember the three criteria. It needs to be objective, consistent, and relevant. So it's objective, consistent, and certainly relevant because we're deriving everything from information security characteristics. So the S2 score is, and again, people will debate all the time about, this measurement versus that measurement. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter as long as it meets those criteria. It's just like debating, is English a better language than French? I guess it depends on whether English or French. But having the translation between those two becomes really important. The only way you can get that is by measuring and being objective. So anyway, that's the S2 score. The inch, I don't know if I'm weird. There's a history behind the measurement of an inch. It was originally the base of a man's thumb was what an inch was. And it was a king of England who was trying to figure out measurement of distance. So that certainly fit the relevant piece because it's the distance between the base of a man's thumb. But where it fell short was in its consistency. And it was also objective too, right? I mean, the base of a man's thumb, the base of a man's thumb. The consistency problem arose because people have different sizes of thumbs. So the way they fixed that, and it's a cool history, the way they fixed that was they took a small man's thumb or small thumb, big thumb, and a medium thumb into the average, and that's became the inch. Interesting history. But same thing here. So once you've done your information security risk assessment, you go through, going through your information security risk assessment. This is just an example of the binary questions. Risk decisions are identified, prioritized, and defined. Prioritized according to defined criteria. If there's confusion in that question, you can certainly use the help function there, but it's a true-false question. Either you are or you're not. If it's not applicable, which most controls are not non-applicable, we actually monitor in the back end the non-applicables because maybe a question isn't relevant. That's what we use to kind of data on the back end for a lot of this stuff. But simple, just yes, no questions. Everything is scored. This is one section within the administrative controls. You can see across the top, current assessment and L3 assessment. There's different levels of assessments. Because no two organizations are the same. Small organizations, they get a totally different risk assessment based on the same core criteria, but a different assessment than, say, Wells Fargo. That's a much different looking risk profile. So different types of assessments. And you see across the top too. This is in phase 1 administrative controls. This is section 1.1, risk management practices and integration. And there's even coaching about, who talking to these people, but, getting answers to these questions, whether it be the CIO or risk management function, if you have one, IT director, CFO. There's also some reference documents. So it's really meant to be a simple, guided information security risk assessment. It scales up to, the largest organizations and scales down to the smallest. So there's your assessment. And now, getting that language sort of spoken. When you talk to executive management, you tell them that your information security risk score is based on a scale of 300 to 850. And today we score 541. They get that right away. We did that on purpose because they understand personal risk. They understand personal risk scores. So they know that if I had a 541 FICO score, it's probably not so good. I probably need to get more collateral if I'm going to, borrow money, what have you. So the dashboard is a simple representation of everything that was accumulated in the risk assessment, including the overall score and the scores across phases. So you can see right away that the most significant risks at this level really reside in in external technical controls. Physical controls are pretty good. And then you've got all the report functions. Simple tool, easy to use, scoring everywhere because we need to put things in the context. To complete all 4 phases, questions and answers, vulnerability scanning is built into phase 3. physical walkthrough. These are just ways to get the data into the assessment. Most partners today, and they've been trained, so they have been in the tool for a while. They can complete their assessments in a day or less. So it's not a huge time commitment. I'd say most customers and users that are using the platform, they take their time. They usually do it in chunks, so it could be weeks, but it's maybe an hour here, hour there to get through the entire assessment. And then if you're done with that, there's the now what? The step 2, build a roadmap. So there's our assessment. Now we need to go to the roadmap and we need to build, what are we going to do? So the roadmap is very simple. You can see the quantification on the top where it says plus 0.41 points. That's how much of a risk score bump you would receive by doing this one control. Helps you to put things in context about what risk is maybe more impactful than another. And make your decisions, accept, mitigate, transfer, and avoid. That's decision number 1. The next decision is what is when we're going to do it and who. And sometimes people go the who first and then the when, and sometimes people go the when first or the who, and then the who after. It doesn't really matter. You just need to define those 3 things. What are we going to do? When are we going to do it? And who's going to do it? Road mapping, you've never done road mapping with information security. The first time, it's a tedious sort of process, again, because you haven't done it before. But ideally, as you start working through the roadmap, the next time you do your assessment, there's less risks, right? Less decisions to make, potentially. So that leads us to step 3, which is then putting things into action. So execution on your roadmap. The roadmap is also a nice function because it gets everybody on the same page. Everybody's well aware of what things we're doing, when we're doing it, and who's going to do it. And there's our great place to be. Where you are, where you're going, when you're going to get there, and how much it's going to cost. There's a trend line, which executive management, I think, generally thinks that's kind of a sexy thing, I guess. One last thing about being self-assessed. So this particular badge shows that it was a self-assessment, meaning you did of yourself. Depends on the audience where you're taking this assessment. Self-assessments and validated assessments. Validated assessment means that somebody who's qualified and trusted to perform a validation or attest to the facts in the assessment did do that, that they're true, that they're accurate. Self-assessments are great if the audience is internal. If you don't need that extra credibility or trust behind the assessment. And they're good for kind of working, right, tactical things. Validated assessments are good if the audience is going to be anybody external, anybody who questions, do you really know what you're talking about, and do I trust you, all that stuff. SecurityStudio partners do the validations because they are vetted, they are qualified, they are trusted, and VanBo is certainly an authorized partner who does perform validations. So you have options when you're using a risk assessment tool like the S2 org. You can either go get the S2 org yourself and do your own assessment, which then becomes a self-assessment, and then bring VanBo in later at the end, maybe to validate your assessment. That's one option. Another option is to get started with your own assessment and then bring VanBo in to help coach you through the rest of the assessment or just kind of walk along. Another option is to go through VanBo and have VanBo do the entire assessment with you. It's always a really, really good education process. It's been my experience. When you sit across from somebody and you're going through an assessment like this, in general, people are like, oh, I didn't even know that. I didn't even consider that was a thing. It makes sense. There's a lot of light bulbs that go off when you're going, or that go on when you're doing a risk assessment with somebody. So, I was doing my first, honestly, I would encourage you to do it with somebody. I would encourage you to do it with somebody like VanBo. If you're pretty astute on information security and you feel really comfortable with doing these things, then go ahead and give it a whirl yourself. So why would I want to validate it? These are the reasons why most often we find that people validate assessments. The board of directors wants it because they want it to be as accurate and true as possible. It's not so much necessarily a trust thing. They just want it, kind of rubber stamped. Executives want it because they also want to make sure it's accurate. Regulators, examiners, auditors, somebody external to the organization will almost always want a validated assessment. And maybe that is a trust thing, I'm not sure. Some customers won't take your word for it, some will. There's three things you usually take to the customer, I've found. It's trust, credibility, and they need to like you. So certainly having an information security risk assessment that you can share at least the results with your customers helps you establish trust, helps you establish credibility. And depending on how you communicate it to them, it might make you more likable too. So that's when you start realizing a return on your information security investment. It helps you to get more customers, helps you to keep customers. But your customers might want a validated assessment. It's really up to you. They are more credible, accurate, and actionable. Typically, score fluctuations from validated and invalidated assessments are typically 5 to 10%. So, and typically you assessed yourself better than you actually ended up being. That's typical. You've seen it the other way around too. People are just hard on themselves and don't give themselves credit for stuff. But it makes it more accurate. The reason for all of this, I think most businesses are in business to make money. Can we use information security to make ourselves more money? The answer is yes. Certainly in today's business environment, more so than I think in the past. People want trust. People want to trust the people they do business with. So security can definitely be played. A lot of it comes down to how you market it. All right, so next steps, contact VanBo. This is us. This is SecurityStudio. If you wanted to estimate your free, if you want to just try out, right? Try out, it's actually not on the platform. We call it the S2 score estimator. VanBo has their own. So you can go to that link, securitystudio.com/VanBo. They'll be informed that you took the assessment, and then you guys can talk about it, right? Talk about what the results were, what made sense, what didn't make sense, what your next steps might be. Go visit VanBo, vanbo.tech.